Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome back. Hope you're having a fantastic day. I'm going to share some information with you that you must look at and you must analyze before you buy any new car. Now, of course, first you have to decide on what type of vehicle you want. So if you're considering something like this, you're probably thinking of going camping, you want some room, you want it to be an SUV. You would not consider something like this. Okay? But once you decide what class of vehicle you want, before you just choose based on the color or the appearance, here's a website that will show you fantastic information. So you're considering buying a Subaru Forester. You go here on Automobile Catalog and you look up the detailed specifications of the engine. This picture right here is probably the most important information about the car and how the car will drive. This is the torque and horsepower curve with RPM along the bottom axis here, and then torque on the orange numbers and horsepower with the white numbers. And for the Subaru Forester 2024, you can see that the horsepower increases and peaks at about 5,700 RPM, and it's not very much. It's that 180 horsepower right there. But more importantly, you can see the torque curve here, which is very low at low RPM and slowly increases and slowly increases until it gets to what is that, about 4,500 where it peaks and then tapers off. What does this tell you? This tells you that under normal driving conditions in the city, when you're at low RPM, anywhere between 1,000 and 2,500 RPM, that's most of your driving in the city, down here, you have virtually no torque. You have under 150 foot-pounds of torque for most of your driving. And why is that important? Because torque is one of the most important specifications in any car that you'll buy. Okay, torque. You want to undo a bolt, right? You put the wrench on the bolt and you apply a force to try and turn that bolt. Now the force times the distance, the length of the tool you're using, that's how much torque you can put on the bolt to loosen the bolt. Now, this applies a certain amount of torque with the force I'm applying with my hand. But if that bolt is really tough to move, you get a bigger tool, right? Now I can put the same force on, but this distance is more torque. I can turn the bolt easier. The torque is the ability to turn that nut or bolt. Same in a car. Think of torque as the ability to turn the wheels. The higher torque an engine has, the easier it can turn those wheels. When you drive this car under normal conditions at low RPM, it will feel gutless. It will not accelerate. You'll get to a slight incline and you'll press on the gas pedal and nothing will happen until you get this car probably up to 335, 4,000 RPM. That's when you start getting a good amount of torque, and that's when your horsepower just barely makes it over 100. Right? Most of your city driving between 1,000 and 2,500 RPM, you're sitting below 75 horsepower. That's almost none, and very low torque. That's why a lot of people that try the Forester say, well, it's gutless, it's an old lady vehicle. Compare that to the Crosstrek, okay? Here's the Crosstrek. I'm on the same website, and I'm going to show you the torque curve for the Crosstrek. It's slightly different. It has the same horsepower curve, but the torque curve has been tuned slightly differently. How? You can see the torque curve for the Crosstrek is steeper. It increases faster, and it peaks at a lower RPM, at around 3,500 RPM. And it stays fairly flat up in this range. So the Crosstrek at lower RPM has more torque, and in that band of 3,000 to 5,000 has pretty much full torque. It's going to perform and it's going to feel a lot more sporty and a lot more peppy and powerful than the Forester. The Outback Wilderness. Now we looked at the Forester Wilderness, the Crosstrek Wilderness, all 2024 models. Now look at the Outback. Look at this beautiful horsepower and torque curve. Now all of a sudden, you'll notice that the horsepower peaks at 260, not 180. So it has a lot more horsepower. But more importantly, look at the torque curve. It's very steep and peaks down at 2,000 RPM. You have full torque at 2,000 RPM. At 2,000 RPM, you have 100 horsepower and full torque. Right off the line, when you press the accelerator and you're almost idling, just above idle RPM, you have almost full, not full power, but you have full torque. This car is going to accelerate off the line and push you back in your seat, and you're going to go, wow, this thing's fast. This is going to have almost instantaneous response to the throttle, and you're basically playing with full torque, which is 270 foot-pounds, much higher than the Crosstrek or the Forester. It is just a much better tuned engine in its torque profile. You will enjoy city driving. It's going to be instantly responsive even at low RPM. And when you rev the thing up to the 4,000, 4,500 RPM, you have full torque and very steeply increasing power. So this vehicle will have a completely different feel from the other two. And I've shown you these three because they kind of illustrate the gutless extreme to the super tuned powerful. And I own the Outback Wilderness, and I'm so happy with it. I'm going to show you why is this, does this really make a difference, just having this flat torque curve? And it's such a huge difference. I'll just show you one more because it illustrates how they tune this Outback Wilderness to be more like their premier sports car. The WRX, which is their flagship sports car, used to be the STI, but they can't make it anymore because of emissions standards. But this is their fastest sports car, okay? Look at the torque curve for that. It looks almost like the Outback Wilderness. It is tuned, it's the other way around. They tuned the Outback Wilderness to be almost like their sports car. This is the torque curve for the WRX. Same thing, very steep and peaks at 2,000 RPM and stays flat all the way to 5,000. This thing peaks at 270 horsepower instead of 260. But the engine on the Outback Wilderness is pretty much almost equivalent to the engine they have in their flagship sports rally car. Now, of course, the WRX is not as heavy, and its suspension and stuff is tuned differently, so it's a sports car. But the Outback Wilderness engine gives you this feeling. You're driving a station wagon with a sports car feeling. It's incredible. Compared to the Forester, look at this torque curve on the Forester, peak horsepower of 180. Well, you never get to full power here on this car because at 180 horsepower, your torque is already dropping off. I guess the sweet spot here is 4,500 RPM. That's when you have full torque and you only have 150 horsepower. So when you read the specs of a car on their website, it'll say 182 horsepower and 175 foot-pounds of torque. And you go, oh, if you just read the number, what does it mean? Well, with this car, it means that you almost never have that. It means that most of your driving, you have in between 50 and 100 horsepower, and in between 120 and 160 foot-pounds of torque. Most of your driving is in this area here. You're almost never revving this thing at 5,000, 6,000 RPM. You probably never, if you buy a Forester, you will never have 182 horsepower because there are some people that will never rev their car close to 6,000 RPM. You'll never get there. You'll always be driving in, with gutless power. Let me show you kind of a competitor example because I've talked about Subaru. I know a lot about the Subarus. But if you're interested in a Subaru Forester or Crosstrek, you might say, well, Ford Escape is the same sort of class. It's a small SUV. Maybe you'd consider a Ford Escape instead of a Subaru. And you're going to decide what Ford Escape to buy. There's choices on the engine for the Ford Escape. So let's look at the 2024 Ford Escape with the 1.5 liter EcoBoost engine, okay? And you look at the torque curve here. The horsepower peaks at, it looks like at about 180 horsepower, which is similar to the Forester. Now look at this torque curve on this engine. It increases steeply here and peaks at 200 foot-pounds of torque, which I think is a little bit higher than the Forester, but immediately starts to drop off. So you have peak torque at 3,000 RPM, and that's it. Any other RPM, you don't have peak torque. So when you read the specs and it says 180 horsepower and 200 foot-pounds of torque. You only have 200 foot-pounds of torque at 3,000 RPM. Between 1,000 and 2,000 and 2,500, I'd have to say this is pretty good. It's steep and it's increasing rapidly. So this thing will feel peppy off the mark. You'll go, oh, it's not going to be as gutless as the Forester off the line. At low RPMs, you have a rapidly increasing torque, and let's say at 2,500 RPM, you're going to have 80 horsepower and 180 foot-pounds of torque. This thing is going to be peppy off the mark and go, whoa, feels nice. But then when you get to 35, 4,000, 4,500 RPM, when you're going to try and pass someone, your torque is immediately dropping off and your horsepower is not increasing as steeply, and it only peaks at about 180. This thing is going to feel, how should I describe it? Gutless on the highway trying to pass someone. You're not going to, you're traveling at 100, 110 kilometers an hour. You're at 3,000 RPM. You're in the sweet spot here. You want to pull it to pass someone. As soon as you press on that accelerator and you increase your RPM, you're losing torque. You're going to struggle to pass people going up a hill with this thing. Okay? What about the other engine option? The 2024 Ford Escape with the 2.5 liter engine. What does that one look like? Look at this beautiful improvement. Look, like night and day, right? Look at this. This is like the Matrix for me, right? When you see the Matrix movie, when the green stuff is coming down there and Neo says, do you always look at it in code like that? And the guy says, you see little green symbols and dots, but all I see is the woman in the red dress. I can look at these graphs, and in my mind, I know how this car is going to feel. This is going to feel night and day, orders of magnitude better than the other engine. Look at this thing. It's beautiful. It has a steeply climbing torque curve that peaks at 2,000 RPM, much, much quicker at 225 foot-pounds of torque. And it's flat. Look at that. It's beautiful. What this means is when you're revving at low RPMs, usually in city driving or stop signs, stop lights, just starting 1,500, 2,000 RPM, you're going to be putzing around with 75 horsepower, which is not very much, but you're going to have peak torque at 2,000 RPM. So this car is going to be responsive to you pressing on the gas pedal. It's going to feel like instantaneous feedback to your throttle. It will not hesitate. It doesn't have to wind up in RPM to start moving. And then you have a flat torque curve. So 2,000, 2,500, 3,000, 4,000, all the way up to 5,000 RPM, you have full torque. It's beautiful and increasing horsepower as you go. So when you're cruising at 2,500 RPM and you want to pass someone, and you press on the accelerator, you're going to get more and more and more horsepower as you push the gas down, and you still have full torque. This thing is going to pass people easily, right? It's almost a sports car tuned torque horsepower curve. So if you're trying to decide which engine do I get when I buy the Escape, do you want to drive do you want to have better fuel economy and drive a gutless car, and you're not really going to tow anything, or you're not really going to, you're just going to putz around slowly, and you're good with that, then go for the 1.5 liter engine. But if you want a car that you can safely merge onto a highway, you're constantly driving on the highway, you're driving on roads where you may have to pass people, the different conditions of driving, then this is night and day better. And if you just read the statistics, right? If you just read the statistics on these two engines, this 2.5 liter engine is going to say 224 horsepower with 225 foot-pounds of torque. And the 1.5 liter engine is going to say 180 horsepower with 200 foot-pounds of torque. And you're going to say, well, the other one had 225 foot-pounds of torque. This one has 200. They're almost the same. Has a little less horsepower. Should be okay. No, it's not. This is going to feel like a piece of garbage compared to the other one. Because although they advertise 200 foot-pounds of torque peak, that's only for 1 point. For all other RPM, you don't have anything close to that. And that's how a lot of these really high-end cars are tuned and designed. Like let's look at the Porsche 911, all right? Super sports car. No surprise when you look at the torque curve. Now, of course, these numbers are much higher than all the other ones we looked at. This thing peaks at, I don't know, what is that, 400 horsepower? But importantly, the car is tuned so that you have a flat torque curve. Very steep increasing, and this is over, 325 foot-pounds. This is massive amount of torque and horsepower. But the shape of the curve, look at it. Flat torque curve, full torque for a wide range of RPM. This is very similar to the Outback Wilderness, the WRX, the Audi, the Ford Escape with the large engine. Look for this shape, okay? This shape in the torque curve means your car is going to feel wonderful. This shape on the torque curve, now we're looking at the Forester, the Subaru Forester again, this is going to feel gutless. Now, some companies are sneaky and they hide their information. They do not make it public. If you're interested in Toyota, you'll never find the information, right? They don't publish it. They hide it. You look everywhere and you can't find it. And we're going to use an example here. This is the competitor for the Subaru WRX. We looked at the torque curve for the Subaru WRX. It's beautiful, nice, flat torque curve, full torque down at 2,000 RPM, I think, and flat. One of the competitors, the GR Corolla, their rally car. This is a 3-liter sports car. And you go through the website here and you get a lot of information like born from rally racing. They talk about 3-cylinder turbo engine, boosts, innovative GR4 front to rear adjustable all-wheel drive. They give you a lot of information here. You can look at this and it tells you 300 horsepower, which is more than the Subaru. You can click key features, and the key features are they'll tell you it's a 1.6 liter turbo 3-cylinder engine. Immediately they start telling you it has an 8-inch Toyota multimedia screen, Drive Connect capability. So whatever that means, wireless Apple CarPlay, 12.3-inch digital gauge cluster, heated seats. It has a red brake caliper. The brake calipers are red. You know, it tells you all this stuff that, okay, but what's the horsepower and torque? It tells you a lot of like cosmetic stuff. What about full specifications? Let's click full specifications. And what do they tell you? Let's move my head here. And even if you go into the full specifications and you click powertrain mechanical, what do they tell you? Powertrain mechanical features, they don't tell you much. Maybe dimensions, do they have it under there? Oh, dimensions, okay, yeah, let's look. What do they tell you? Horsepower, 300. They don't even mention the torque. I looked at some websites here, Motor Trend. Let's look at the Motor Trend review. So let's see what they say here about their driving experience, okay? And we're off. The GR Corolla small displacement 3-cylinder engine makes peak power rather high in the rev range. So launching it hard requires buzzing the tach to about 6,000 RPM and lifting off the clutch smoothly. What the hell are you talking about? That's not how people drive. These guys are professional race car drivers, right? So you're going to take this car in the city and you're going to be at a traffic light. What they expect you to buzz the RPM to 6,000 and then let off on the clutch? Most people are going to let off on the clutch and slowly press the accelerator, and nothing's going to happen because it has no horsepower or torque down at low RPM. Let's keep reading here. A surprisingly drama-free rapid takeoff ensues. Oh, a rapid-free takeoff ensues if you rev the car to 6,000 RPM before you even move. No Subaru-style slam-bang half-shift shattering noises here. So they slam Subaru. They say that the Subaru is noisy. Okay. And although the low-end torque is fairly weak, it doesn't come on in full until 3,000 RPM, and it lasts through 5,500 RPM. The turbo triple builds revs eagerly and pulls hard towards the 6,500 RPM horsepower peak, making a pleasant yet muted someone dropped a beehive noise. Toyota says the GR Corolla can hit 60 miles per hour under 5 seconds. Okay, so that's their driving experience. So I can't seem to find the horsepower and torque curve for a car like this. Either they don't publish it or it's not readily available on any website I've looked for. But from reading reviews and reading the numbers, it's obvious that this thing has very high horsepower at the extreme end of RPM, and the torque doesn't peak until 3,000 RPM and starts dropping off at 5,000 RPM. So a regular person driving this car, when you're stopped at a stoplight or stopped at a stop sign and you're just going to start accelerating, if you just let your foot off the clutch and press on the accelerator and you're down at 2,000 RPM, just like a regular driver, an average slow driver, you're going to do that and the car's not going to really, you're going to say, this thing has 300 horsepower? It's not, come on, it's not really moving. As the guy in the Motor Trend article explained, it's not till you get to 6,000 RPM that this engine really starts finding its sweet spot. So driving this thing in the city as a regular daily commuter is gonna be excruciating. This thing is for a performance fanatic that understands rally racing and sports car driving. And basically, anytime you're driving this car to the full potential, you're probably going to get a speeding ticket. It will not feel like a very user-friendly, nice car to drive. For a sports enthusiast, you may love it. But for the average person, this car is going to feel kind of gutless at low RPM, and it's going to wind up to be a Porsche-like at high RPM, and trying to manipulate that RPM with a standard transmission. And if you're just driving to go buy groceries or drive to work, you're going to be very frustrated driving this car, trying to get the full potential out of it. As opposed to the WRX, which a Motor Trend guy said was noisy. And it is. The Subarus are noisy. When you rev them, they make that Subaru Boxster engine. It's very noisy. But this thing is a pleasure to drive. You have peak torque down at 2,000 RPM. You have peak torque all the way through the full RPM range here, even though you don't have as much horsepower. In regular driving conditions in the city, you're probably going to feel that the WRX is much more responsive than the GR Corolla, unless you have fantastic drivers that really know what they're doing, and they'll be able to get more out of that Corolla driving it in its sweet spot than this thing. Right? But the average person is going to find this thing much more of a pleasure to drive. And who's going to argue with the Porsche 911? Look at this torque and horsepower curve. Try and find that shape in whatever car you're going to buy. It doesn't matter if it's a sports car. Right? In any car you're going to buy, try and look for this shape in your horsepower and torque curve, and the car will just be a pleasure to drive. Stay away from this shape. Okay? And I wish I could show you the torque curve for that GR Corolla. I can't find one. But it's going to be very specific, specifically targeted for a certain audience of performance driver, not a user-friendly car for general. And I bet Toyota would agree with that. They're calling it their rally car. So anyways, guys, I'll leave a link for this website here. It's a very hard website to navigate. I usually just type in torque, horsepower, curve, the car name, and automobile catalog on the search engine in Google, and it usually takes you to the torque curve for the car that you're looking for. Look at this information before you buy any car, right? Once you decide what class of car, and you've narrowed it down to 5 or 6 different brands, see if you can find this information on all of them, and look at them, and this will give you a good idea of how the car will feel when you actually drive it, if you can understand what these curves mean. Yeah. All right, guys. Hopefully that was helpful. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll catch you on the next one.